You're listening to the Artist Athlete Podcast, episode 89. This podcast is dedicated to CIRCUS. It's a place for professionals in the industry to share their stories, viewpoints, and information, and a place for outsiders to get a sneak peek into this world. Hey friends, fans, and enemies. I'm Shannon McKenna. I'm the host of the Artist Athlete Podcast and the founder of theartistathlete.com. This podcast, each and every week, is sponsored by my amazing Patreons. Go to patreon.com/theartistathlete. Especially, I want to take a moment to recognize those people who write me sometimes and are like, you know, Shannon, I really love your podcast. I keep meaning to sign up to be a Patreon, but I keep forgetting, or something like that. This is your reminder, because I'm so glad you love the podcast and I'm glad you keep meaning to sign up. But actually, unless you do sign up, I can't really use the $5 a month that you're going to send my way to make the podcast better. So if you keep meaning to sign up, make today the day you actually do. Patreon.com/theartistathlete. My guest today is Joanna Haigood. Since 1980, Joanna has been creating work that uses natural, architectural, and cultural environments as points of departure for movement, exploration, and narrative. Whoa, that's a crazy good sentence. Her stages have included grain terminals, a clock tower, the Pope's Palace, military forts, and a mile of urban neighborhood streets in the South Bronx. Her work has been commissioned by many arts institutions, including Dancing in the Streets, Jacob's Pillow Dance Festival, Walker Arts Center, the Exploratorium Museum, the National Black Arts Festival, and Festival d'Avignon. She has been honored with the Guggenheim Fellowship, the Herb Alpert Award in the Arts, the United States Artist Fellowship, and a New York Bessie Award. Haigood is also a recipient of the esteemed Doris Duke Award. Joanna has had the privilege to mentor many extraordinary young artists internationally at the Trinity Laban Conservatoire of Music and Dance in England, Spelman College, the Institute for Diversity in Arts at Stanford University, the San Francisco Circus Center, and at her home, Zacco Dance Studio. As this podcast gets more and more episodes, you'll start to notice that there are certain circles of people who will kind of reference each other. And in this episode, we reference two artists who have been on the podcast before. The first is Veronica Blair, who was on episode 19. We also talk a little bit about Terry Crane and his company Acrobatic Conundrum, and that's on episode 22. And lastly, Joanna doesn't mention this person, but Joe Kreider, who's on episode 71, named Joanna as one of her mentors when she was starting to do site-specific work in the Bay Area for social justice. So you can go listen to those episodes after you check in. I also want to offer an extra special thank you to Joanna. She lives about an hour outside of San Francisco, California, and we actually had to delay it once. We had to push back our interview time because the wildfires in her area were so bad that she was scared she was going to have to evacuate. And she mentions a little bit at the end of the interview about the smoke. So you'll hear that, but thank you, Joanna. And everybody on the West Coast, please stay safe. Wear your masks indoors and out, and go vote. Here's my interview with Joanna Haigood. Joanna Haigood, welcome to the Artist Athlete Podcast.
Thank you. Glad to be with you today.
Yes, I'm glad you could finally be here. Very excited.
Yes. We had a couple of false starts there.
Yeah, well, you know, the weather. What are you going to do?
Mm-hmm.
Can you start by introducing yourself, saying a little bit about what you do?
Yeah. Well, again, my name is Joanna Haigood. I'm the artistic director of a company in San Francisco called Zacco Dance Theater. This is our 40th year, and I am primarily a site choreographer. I make work in relationship to place. I'm very interested in what place means, how we describe place, how we give place meaning, memory. I'm interested in material, architecture, how bodies interact with history and places, etc. And I'm particularly interested in how to work with space dimensionally. So I often use aerial flight and suspension as a way to kind of create a volume or almost like a sculptural choreography. So that's my work in a nutshell. I've been probably for the past 25 years, I've been the content of my work, not exclusively, but there has been a strong focus on African American histories and elements, situations, social constructs, things that really affect our community.
Where were your inspirations, or what thought leaders or teachers did you draw or become inspired to make this kind of work from?
I think there are a lot of different inspirations coming from different aesthetics, different art forms. My mother worked at Pratt Institute. I grew up in New York, and one of, I think, her interest, besides she was the director of admissions there, she had a strong interest in architecture, and of course, really tried to influence me in that direction. Which, of course, I think I knew that I was going to be a dancer by the time I was 6. However, she exposed me a lot to architectural theory and aesthetics and architects. And I actually worked for an architect also when I was in high school. Actually, that's an interesting story because I think that this particular person was probably the strongest influence in the way that I approach my artwork. However, I'll come back to him in a minute. But then I also went to Bard and studied with some just extraordinary minds there and was exposed to, all the great contemporary artists of that period, Trisha Brown being one of them, who had many, many experiments and the site and place, and also the aerial piece was a big part of her explorations and her practice, along with Meredith Monk, et cetera, et cetera. But anyway, I guess I pushed back. I went to a conservatory also while I was in college. I went to the place in London. I wouldn't call it necessarily traditional, but it wasn't. It was a very rigorous training program with a lot of emphasis on more traditional dance history and techniques.
Do you mean ballet?
There was ballet, but it was also Graham. Graham was the the main contemporary technique that we studied, but it was very rigorous. It was just, all day long, very similar to other conservatories. I felt like I needed to push out a little from there. Like I felt a little bit, even though I really value, particularly now looking back at it in retrospect, I really valued the training that I had there and in all of the other places where I went. I felt like I needed more adventure. I guess maybe that's the best way to think about it. I needed more adventure. And while I was there, I lived next to a circus performer, an aerialist, Judith Holmes. And she took me to a lot of circuses, and we would go to the door and she'd say, I was from here and there, and we'd be ushered into the front row and it'd be very exciting. And, and she took me to
good to have that friend.
Really, yeah. But she took me to see the Wallendas. And Carl Wallenda was still alive, and this is back in the olden days. In the way olden days when I was a youngster. But anyway, they did the 7-man pyramid, and he, of course, was at the top. And that just blew my mind. I mean, of course, it blew anybody's mind. It's quite extraordinary. But there was such focus and grace, and the construction of it, I thought, was really astounding. And then at that point, I thought, wait, what's going on with dance? Like, why are we so stuck on the floor? Why are we just fixed in this 2-dimensional plane? Wow. And that was something that I loved about circus in general. You'd come into a tent and it was all over the place. It was up and down, a vertical, diagonal, lateral, everywhere. And so that was a big push for me to start thinking about the way that I made choreography. And then back to the architect. when I was in high school, I worked for this architect named uh, Richard Snibbe, and he was an eccentric person to say the least. But he was working on this project for someone in Colorado. It was called the Handloser Project, and this man was wealthy, wanted to have a place in the mountains for skiing and reflection. And Snibby thought, wow, let's suspend this building between the mountains, in this valley. And so he started designing this house that would be suspended. But then this idea developed into an entire village that was suspended in the Adirondacks. This was a site that he was interested in, and you could only get there through vernacular. And I mean, it was so out there and so amazing, very kind of like a design from a sci-fi story. And anyway, he spent years and years and years. It was never built, but he spent years developing this idea. And when I worked with him, that was, one of the things that he was working on. So, my job was to, file the papers, make the coffee, do all of the kind of basic clerical stuff and move this idea back and forth, the papers back and forth in the office. And I really think that listening to him think about design in relationship to site, in relationship to materials, was an enormous influence in the way that I think about making my work. I'm not necessarily building these large architectural structures in place. I am moving bodies through space, drawing lines, having bodies interact with specific materials, using materials as a source of inspiration and metaphor, for instance. And that's kind of wrapped up in this idea of what place is, and trying to draw from memory things that are resonant in a space that can help support meaningful storytelling. So the other thing that's kind of interesting, which is very similar to architectural design, is thinking about circulation and how people move through space and what they're encountering, and how certain environments create specific feelings or even provoking certain emotions. If you have a good example or a short example would be, walking into classical city hall, Gothic architecture, or something where you were coming into a small area, or coming into even churches. You come into a small chamber as you enter the building, and then as which is a very contracted space. And then you move through the door, and then suddenly you're in this space with vaulted ceilings. And there's this rush that you feel by the opening of that space, and that exalted, these aspirational and exalted feelings that you experience walking into spaces like that. Well, those are often intentional, you know. They're designed like that to create those feelings. So how do we use what's there to be able to not necessarily manipulate, but to support, as I say, the storytelling
that
you're trying to make. Mm-hmm.
My follow-up question was going to be, do you see the pieces that you choreograph within those spaces as ways to highlight and work with the architecture or work against it?
Well, I mean, I think that even working against it is actually working with it.
Yeah, true.
So I'll just say, yes, I'm always working with it. I'm always very aware of what the elements are. And for me, the site itself is a partner. It's almost 9 times out of 10 the star of whatever it is that I'm making, and I'm able to reveal parts of it by moving the bodies through it.
When I think about like a partnership, like in aerial work, there are certain qualifications that a person would look for in a partner: good communication, certain physical attributes that would lend to the work that they want to make together. For you, if your site is your partner, what kind of attributes or what are you drawn to in a site?
I don't know if there is one thing. I mean, I find that there is something interesting in most places. I mean, Of course, love climbing. I love the, opportunity to bring bodies into the air and to be able to do that in a setting that one can accommodate that, but also has the features that the bodies can climb or use, is always interesting for me. But blank open spaces like in the desert or in Death Valley are also quite extraordinary, particularly, thinking about this idea of time that you brought up earlier, that because this is something that has been a very interesting challenge, and very different way of working and creating choreography, than on a stage where you have, 20, 30 by 40-foot area. There are so many different things that you have to take into consideration, like, how long does it take for you to walk up the stairs, to get to the next point? Sometimes that takes like 4 minutes, just to get from point A to point B, or being able to use these long perspectives. So if you're working with something that is a half a mile long, bringing a body or, whatever it is that you're pulling from the distance into the foreground can take maybe, 10 minutes or so. But the anticipation of that, whatever that is that you're drawing forward, the anticipation of its arrival creates also like a different feeling. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that there's the metered time that we have, and then there's the qualities, the time, the qualitative parts of time. Like I feel that anticipation, the lovers are coming together and time feels like it is suspended, and it goes on for a really long time, even though it's only 30 seconds. Or things where you feel like I'm trying so hard to keep up with all the things that I have to do, and the time is flying by. It's just flying by. It's like you've been working on this thing for an hour and you're not even close to being done, and yet it felt like it was 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So
totally.
I'm really interested in what actually, how those qualities are created, or what are the elements, or what are the key factors in creating that type of response, because it's pretty much the minutes are ticking, the seconds are ticking exactly at the same time, except our experience of time is completely different. So that to me is fascinating, and some of that also is more available, or the palette with which to work with these ideas is there's more opportunity when you're in a site or in a place, or as opposed to on stage. Although I have to say that there are some masters with stage direction, of which I am not. I'll just say. I've tried, but I've spent most of my time outside or did these other, focusing on something completely different. So I'm like, wait, how did they do that?
Yeah, no, totally. No, and to concretize a little bit for the listeners, when you're talking about this, something that this makes me think of is, again, we talked a little bit before the interview started about the San Francisco Aerial Dance Festival that you produced. And you did it in this huge warehouse space, beautiful space. But Acrobatic Conundrum had this setup of ropes, this kind of like line of ropes on one side of it. But the performers, or some of the performers, started at the very, very other side of the warehouse. And so while there were things going on in the foreground, or climbing the ropes, these things, you could see off in the distance these people kind of like running in. And it did exactly what you're talking about, that relationship of time and space and anticipation.
Yes, we had a long talk about that too.
Oh, it was beautiful. Yeah. And it was the kind of thing that in a traditional stage setting, you would have to do through projection, or like you said, like there are ways to do it, but it is a different experience, I think, for the audience.
Yes. Yes.
Very cool.
Yeah. Yeah. It was great working with Terry, working with all of the artists in this program. It's just one of the highlights of all that I do is, bringing these great minds together. But this space, it's an old warehouse on an old military base. And that was one of the features that I thought was just it could not be denied. It's just really, really great. So Terry and I had a really great conversation about this very thing. And
Amazing.
and he said, yes, let's go. Let's make it happen.
So I want to examine a little bit more, bring the interview back to your story. You went to Bard. You were a East Coast girl.
Yeah.
What brought you to San Francisco?
Well, I was really interested in creating a sculpture staging contraption at the time.
Cool.
That was going to take a tremendous amount of research. It was called the Flying Project. I was really interested in what could we build that could bring together aerialists, but be adaptable to a lot of different sites. And it seemed such a daunting task to do or to accomplish in New York City, where everybody was kind of competing for the same crust of bread, and also just surviving in general. Beyond just trying to make work was very, very, very challenging. So I thought, hey, it had been kind of one of those dreams that probably you had to. Let's move to California, where the weather's really great and it's free, and you can dream and jump for your dreams. And little did I know that it was going to be just as difficult. But I just came out here and started my organization with somebody who I'd been working with at the time, Linda Riemann, and she came back, but after about 6 months, she was like, this is strange out here. There's like too many palm trees. I'm not exactly sure, but it was really odd. And so she ran back to the East Coast and eventually came back probably about another 6 months later for a few more, for more years. But anyway, that was kind of the impetus. But once I got here, Lindy and I worked together, I guess about 2.5 years, almost 3 years before she went on to do other things. But it seemed like in order to establish our work and my work, we had to kind of prove ourselves in the world of dance and the world of funding. We realized very soon that actually building something of this size was going to be very, very expensive. So the solution was to start with what we call the environmental project. So we would go and work in specific sites and try to build a repertoire, but also just do some experiments, learn about what it means to actually work in place, and also to, be shifting environments for each project. So like, what did that actually mean? And all of the things that I mentioned earlier, like, how does memory how does memory relate, and what are the histories, et cetera, et cetera. Lindy got through 2 of those projects and then went on. But as I kept developing it myself, it suddenly became far more interesting than actually building a structure. Like the structures that were in place, both natural and architectural, were much more exciting to me. So even though we got through a design process with, I think, four different architects did renderings, and they're all really quite beautiful. This is something I'm working on getting on my website now. It just seemed like I was confused after a while. I was like, why am I building something? There's so much available. Once you arrive and actually you spend some time observing and reflecting.
Well, and I would also imagine that when you build something we haven't really we've talked about time and space and kind of the architecture of a site, but something that you keep bringing up is memory of place or events that have happened in that place and the kind of energy that leaves or gives context to that site. And I would also think that if you're building something, you don't have that aspect to kind of draw from as well.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that's so wonderful, I mean, just, because memory expresses itself in many ways. Some of it is, purely energetic. Some of it is through stories and what people bring, themselves, like, having experience or prior experience in a particular place. But it's also, evident in the wear of whatever those materials are. You can walk up some of those, in particular, like in New York, where people have been walking up the same stairs, or when you're in Europe, a better example, or in the Middle East, where people have been walking in the same spots or this up the same stairs for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And you see the wear in the stone, you see the wear in the bells or the various patinas and the nicks and it's kind of like this, what I think about like a map of
Hmm.
its history. So these very interesting
Neat.
traces of that people and the events leave behind, these kind of marks and wear.
Are there specific places that you're attracted to because of the memory or the history of a place? You strike me, or from what we've talked about so far, it seems like you're more about the physical containers.
It's different for each project. It's hard to kind of pin down, what are the things that draw me immediately. But, like right now I'm doing something at Grace Cathedral in San
Hmm.
Francisco. I mean, there are many things about that particular place and the mission of the cathedral and the staff that is really extraordinary, very, very attractive to come into some kind of alignment with. I mean, I really believe in what they're doing there. And then there is the architecture that is just spectacular. I mean, it's very modern. It's not like going to a European cathedral, but it has so much of the same feelings. It has a 90-foot ceiling. Well, that's actually to the grid, so probably another,
Wow.
15, 20 feet. It's very, very tall, and it has all of those feelings that we were discussing earlier.
And what is their mission, or what are they standing for?
It's an Episcopal church. It's part of the Episcopal Church, but they are really about bringing all people together, all faiths. They are really working towards creating dialogue between all people, all genders, all faiths, all persuasions of whatever we can imagine, to find a balance together and find a way to grow through peace and love and understanding, compassion. And so they are a really strong cultural supporter. There's all kinds of extraordinary art that actually gets performed there, and visual art that's installed there. It's just a powerful statement about our potential as humans, to be together in a way that is compassionate and loving, and the power of that, how through this we can move mountains. We can do anything. We are an extraordinary force for good. And I really believe in that. And, I grew up in the Catholic traditions. I went to Catholic school. I often think of myself as a recovering Catholic.
Me too. Yep.
But I really believe in the work that they do there. And they do it in this amazing place. So, and to be able to think about how to energize or activate that space with bodies and aerial bodies has been really exciting.
If you're talking about visual artists, they have canvas, they have their preferred mediums. Your preferred medium is aerial dance. And part of that is obviously you have to hire a company of performers.
Yeah.
When you're looking for those people, how do you cast or how do you select from? Do you prefer classically trained dancers? What kind of circus artists? What kind of bodies do you usually look for with your work?
I look for people who have a wide range of skills. Certainly I'm drawn to the aerialist because some of, the work really demands those skills. I think I also really look for people who have a strong dance background as well, and who are strong interpreters, who have some type of theater background. There's a lot of, it's not really acting, but it's really important for me for people to be able to lower their veil, those performative veils, in order for us to see their true experience and their investment in the specific idea for the specific story. That's, it's often a tall order, and sometimes I mix, have a mixed skills cast for certain things. But that element that I just mentioned is the most important. I've been working with people, and we do training. We do some training together, either for the ones who are really trying to, who come more from a dance, gymnastic background. They eventually start training in aerial, and the aerialists start training in dance, et cetera, that kind of thing. But now there are more and more people who are cross training.
Yeah, for sure.
I think that's become an important thing for people who are trying to come up in this industry. So that's great for me, because that is particularly at the very beginning, like 40 years ago, that was not the case. It's not the
Totally.
case. Yeah.
And you mentioned at the beginning you're very interested in telling African American stories. And
Yes.
How do you do that? Do you do that in your casting? Do you do that? What are the ways you go about that?
Yes, yeah. That's often through casting, and that's the one thing that when we were talking about Veronica. Veronica's been doing such an extraordinary job in bringing African American circus artists together, to be in conversation, to start recording stories, to really start creating a space for those histories. So that's been wonderful. And I've been meeting so many great people. I was like, well, why do you live in Florida? Could you please move over? Could you please move to San Francisco right now? Because I really need to work with you.
Talk about the total package. Talk about someone who can move well, has all the skills and strength, and can show that vulnerability on stage.
Yes, that is Veronica. Yeah.
So it's mostly through casting. It's through your
it's through casting, and it's through the stories. I mean, it's
cool.
I mean, right? The pieces that I'm touring right now. One is based on W.E.B. Du Bois's book, The Souls of Black Folk, and it is really about how this book that was written in the 1900s, 1903, how this book is still so relevant to where we are now. And so anyway, that's one. And another one is Dying While Black and Brown, which is about the disproportionate number of Black men on death row. Mm-hmm. And one that you may know about, it's an older work. It's called Invisible Wings. It was a piece that I made at Jacob's Pillow in the 90s.
Oh, wow.
About the Pillow's history as a station on the Underground Railroad in the mid-19th century. And that is kind of told through the culture of enslaved people of that time. There's, music, storytelling, dance. There's flying in it. There's a very famous story about enslaved people flying away, being able to pull themselves up from their misery and into this other brighter, more humane future. And, some people speak about that metaphorically. Some people, think that was a state of mind. And some people speak about it as being the reality from the times when our powers were really rich and magical. Yeah. What we keep trying to come back to with all of our aerial stuff, right? It's like, I know we could do this without all this stuff. But in the meantime, let's keep practicing. Right?
There you go. Yeah. So you tour shows as well. What does the structure of your company look like? And how do you, I have 6 questions in one right now. Mm-hmm. What does the structure of your company look like? And how do you tour work that is site specific?
Yeah. So there's a few pieces that are not. So this was a big attempt for me to actually get more work out, because doing site work is very complicated. It takes years to do. It's extremely expensive. And there's often years in between the work that I present. And so I can't remember how many years ago I said, I could actually do a few pieces. And of course, they're probably the Dying While Black and Brown is the easiest one to tour. It's a house structure. that comes apart that, the dancers interact with and climb and do all kinds of things. But everything else, of course, is way too complicated and it matters.
Yeah.
It's like,
And where do you, with Dying While Black and Brown, where do you stage it? Do
we stage
you
it all over the
like
place.
have,
We have done it in
yeah.
community centers. We've done it in churches. We've done it
Okay. So
Harvard
it's like
Law
small enough
School.
to be neat.
It,
It's
yeah.
small enough to be like inside another structure.
Yes. Yes. It happens. The house structure is 6 feet by 6 feet by 8 or 9 feet high, and it's slightly smaller than a cell, but very.
Mm.
It's a it's about uh, representing that lack of space and also kind of how
Right.
one kind of reconciles this sense of home. How do you create that
Right.
idea, something that we all need, that we all naturally try to create. So how do you do that in a place that is inherently about destroying that idea
Mm.
and it's destroying that sense of security?
Mm.
So yeah, and this is something I'm very passionate about. This is my focus and my not my primary focus, but yes, it's one of my primary focuses in my activism, is supporting the abolition of the death penalty. So I work with a civil rights law firm, so some of this work has just really come out of those collaborations, and it's an opportunity for me to be able to stay involved in on with issues that are important to me as a citizen, and to be able to support an organization that is really doing the kind of the deep work in shifting and influencing, actually just really disseminating information that will wake people up to change our legislation.
Very cool. I always love hearing stories of how artists are impacting policy.
We're
Also,
trying. Well,
because
everybody is.
I feel like so
Uh,
I feel like so often art is seen as superfluous or
mhm.
this thing that's kind of a luxury.
Yeah.
And so when I have art, especially circus, so when I have aerial dancers or artists on the show who are politically minded or socially minded, really, it's always inspiring to me and really awesome. So thank you for your work and extending that as part of
Yeah.
your mission. It's
Yeah. I
very
mean,
cool.
I feel mostly, I heard, well, some of these things don't feel like they are a choice. They are really
Mm,
more about, they seem important as a way to just survive. If some of us are suffering, I mean, we're all suffering. I really believe in that.
hmm. Yeah,
So
for sure.
it's important to be paying attention, and you do what you can. You do what you can. Everybody can, does it in a different way and at different scales. I can do this. This is what I can contribute. Um,
What
so,
advice would you give to someone who wants to be more active in their artistic work or in their career as a artist, choreographer, dancer, circus performer?
well, I would say to really find what it is that you feel passionately about, that's things that seem really important to you, that you feel, where you really feel the change is necessary or whatever it is. It's something that you feel really, really aligned with. And then start looking for people who are actually doing that work. Collaboration, I think, is really powerful. It's like, we're not going to make these changes by ourselves. That's why they call them, these big movements. You have to, they're not made of one people, even though one person, has power, and we should not underestimate our own power. But together we are very, very strong. And so I would just recommend, searching for the people, the organizations that are doing the deep work, and finding ways to collaborate. Start there.
I feel like I could talk to you all day, but we do have to
Yeah.
wrap up.
So we have to wrap
Thank
up
you so much.
already?
I know we've been at it for almost an hour.
Wow.
And I want to make sure I can give you some space for my final question.
Now I'm scared.
Oh yeah, you should be. It's a toughie. Um, no, it's something I ask everyone, and it's because when I originally made this podcast, it was kind of like a love letter to my beginner artist self. I didn't grow up. My parents are doctors,
Oh.
and I didn't really know how to break into especially the circus world. And I just wished that I could have a catalog of advice from people who had come before me to kind of give me some guidance or some things that I could kind of hold on to. So I made this podcast. And the last question that I always ask people is, what advice would you give to yourself at the beginning of your career?
Well, at the beginning of my career or at the beginning of somebody else's career, it was so long ago. It's hard for me to remember. But I think the thing that I did try to hold on to is to try to be true to the vision, not to get distracted by the notion of failure. That, true adventure and true exploration is bound to encounter failure. And as we know, failures are learning opportunities. So I actually don't even call them failures anymore. I think about it as variations. This is an interesting variation, right? And move on. I think that it is, people get caught up with failure and how they're seen and whether or not they're being famous or, all of those things are completely irrelevant to them, to the deeper, well, I find the deeper mission of my work is to really connect with my spiritual, get my intellect and my spirit to connect, to have some breakthrough to understanding what it is that we are experiencing while we are here on this planet. It's very, very brief, as you know, and it gets briefer as you get older. So I would just say, explore, have adventures, stay open, have fun. Because if it's not fun, then why?
Yeah, if it's not fun, you could be an accountant, make way more money.
Exactly.
For sure.
Exactly. And don't worry about all these external things. It's like it's bumpy, and that's what makes it interesting. Makes it interesting. So.
I love that. Do you have anything in particular that kind of keeps you grounded when you feel like you're getting distracted by those ideas of like fame or success or notoriety? Do you have like a daily practice or an anchor or something that you use? You don't have to answer that.
I don't know. I mean, I don't really, I never think about being famous because I'm really not. So it's all good.
You're famous to me.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah.
But we're hanging out. So all it means is that we're two people doing, and now you're famous to me because I know you, right?
Oh, yay.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's,
hey.
You just gotta, I don't know what my daily practice is, just to take some deep breaths. Right now I'm running. So it's just, it's everything is always a challenge. It's like, wow, I'm 63 and now I'm becoming a runner. Wow, weird. Good. This is hard. This is really difficult. But yeah, it kind of keeping that perspective of, where I am in relationship to the entire systems here. It's like, that's why I love to be in nature. I used to spend a lot of time by myself, weeks at a time at Death Valley. And the scale of the landscape, everything there is just so extreme. And I would feel even less than a grain of sand. And it was really important to hold that perspective, for a time, just to kind of recalibrate, the importance of all of my ego,
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. I remember once going to a planetarium and feeling the same way.
Yeah.
Where you kind of like look up at the stars and you're like,
oh, yeah.
I guess it's not that big of a deal.
Yeah, right. It's just like, I'm a blip. I'm a blip. Yeah, but a really important one, nonetheless.
That's it.
Just to hold those joys because this is a pretty amazing experience that we get to have. For however
Mm,
long we get it, it's quite extraordinary. I'm very grateful that I got to land here on the planet and to be, connected to such great people and to just everything, the animals. This amazing
yeah.
thing that I wish that you could see out my window. I mean, it's a dark, it's so dark, and it is a red sky. It's just, I don't even know how to explain it. It's just this deep fog, smoke. It's like being under a blanket, and the blanket is this kind of
Wow.
red and yellow mix, and you can't see farther than probably 100 feet. It's very odd. It's very apocalyptic, as I said. It's just like, wow.
It's certainly it's certainly a variation.
There's another variation.
Oh my God. Well, Joanna, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the
Thanks,
show
Shannon,
today.
and thanks for your patience
wonderful
through all of this. It's so great to speak with you.
Oh my God. It was my pleasure.
Yeah, take good care.
That was my interview with Joanna Haigood. I'm going to keep it short and sweet this week. Again, it was amazing to have Joanna on the podcast. And she mentioned so many amazing artists and thinkers and people. Martha Graham, Meredith Monk, Richard Snibbe, W.E.B. Du Bois. All of these people who are incredibly influential in very different spheres. And I'm going to include links in the show notes to some of their work so you can start to understand where Joanna is gathering inspiration and how that's all working together to make Zacco what it is. If you want to know more about Joanna's company, Zacco Dance Theater, you can go to zacco.org. That's ZACCHO.org. Or on Instagram, there's Zacco SF. As for me, for aerial training tips and inspiration, I am on Instagram at @the_artist_athlete. My website is The Artist Athlete. I'm on Facebook, The Artist Athlete. And if you love what you're listening to and you keep meaning to sign up, patreon.com/theartistathlete is the place to go. Thanks for tuning in. I'll talk at you next week, friends, fans, and enemies. The Artist Athlete podcast is supported solely by donations from people like you. Here's what some of those people have to say.
Hi everyone, this is Allie Cooper, owner and coach at the Radical Movement Factory in Santa Cruz, California. I love supporting the Artist Athlete podcast and the amazing community Shannon has created here. I teach rope and fabric and have a circus conditioning app available on iTunes called CIRCUS. You can follow me on Instagram at AllieCooper_, and if you find yourself in California, come say hi.
Hi, I'm Leah. I hate conditioning. So I created the ABCs of Fitness, a fun, full program of active flexibility, body weight, and cardio with personal daily check-ins to motivate you wherever you are and whatever discipline you do. Join our next 19-day check-in challenge and slide into my DMs on Instagram at ABCs of Fitness.
Aloha! My name is Beth Russell, and I live on the beautiful island of Maui, Hawaii. I am an aerial artist and movement instructor specializing in chakra yoga to keep me balanced and grounded. I play with silks, trapeze, lyra, rope, acro, aerial yoga and dance, slacklining, pole, bungee, and climbing. Really anything that goes up and allows me to explore 3D space. You can find my dedicated aerial page on Instagram at Maui Aerialist. If you find yourself coming to Maui, let's play.
Hey there, friends, fans, and enemies. This is Chris Alston, Patreon of the Artist Athlete podcast, straps artist and lyra performer and acrobat out of Greenville, South Carolina. So if you're ever passing through, make sure to stop in and see me and my friends. We have a wonderful space, and we'd love to see you.
Hi, my name is Erica Lee. I'm from St. Louis, Missouri, and I'm an aerialist. I teach performing arts to elementary school during the day and do pole and swing and rope by night. I really, really like the Artist Athlete podcast because it gives me a lot of circus goals to look forward to. It gives me a lot of insight on what's going on around the world in circus, and that's why I'm Patreon.
Hello all,
Thank you for tuning in to the Artist Athlete podcast. I am Opal Schwartz from Minneapolis, Minnesota. If you're ever in the city, feel free to stop by the Aviary Minneapolis. It's a great time. With that, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week, and goodbye.
Hey there, artists and athletes. This is Andy Smith, owner and artistic director at Saltaire Circus School in Jacksonville Beach, Florida. And I want to thank you for contributing to the Artist Athlete podcast. If you ever find yourself down in Florida, come check us out. Whether you're an artist, athlete, or someone ordinary just looking to be extraordinary, we've got a place for you.